Good afternoon. Welcome to episode 1 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Before we get into today's show, just want to talk a little bit about what we're doing here. 1010XL wants to have a YouTube show for a lot of different reasons, to pertain to different audiences, to try to bring in a bunch of different cool guests, to have a live post-game reaction show that we're going to be starting this Sunday after the Dolphins game. But really, for me specifically, I just want the point of this show for everyone to be able to learn something every time they tune in, because that's what I like to do when I tune into other shows. And so we're going to start every show out with some Jaguars trivia. First question. Let's see if we can pull this up. Josh Hines-Allen is 10.5 sacks away from becoming the Jaguars' all-time sack leader. Who currently holds a franchise record? A. Calais Campbell, B. Yannick Ngakoue, C. John Henderson, or D. Tony Brackens. I'll give about 5 seconds for people to think of the answer. Try to not start out with a super difficult one. The answer today is D. Tony Brackens has the all-time sack record at 55 sacks. Josh Hines-Allen is at 45 sacks, which means he needs another 10.5 to get it. So we'll see if it happens this season. Today, I'm very excited to bring in our first guest of the show, Mike Dempsey, co-host.
It was better with the hat off, I think. So I just realized how dark it looks in here.
It looks a little dark, and it's like shining in all different weird angles. We can do a hat day sometime planned. I'll bring in a hat. But yeah, Mike is the co-host of Jaguars Today with Tony Smith. He also appears on Jaguars Game Day radio coverage, as well as NFL SiriusXM fantasy football show. Yeah. So, Mike, thanks for coming on.
Well, you mentioned cool guests on this podcast. I figured I'd get in before they start showing up.
Absolutely. You put your name in first.
Right away. Let me get in before they start getting busy on this thing.
All right. Well, are you getting busy right now? How are you feeling leading up to the game? We got about, six days until season opener.
I feel pretty good. I was a little concerned at the beginning. First preseason game, the offensive line didn't get much push whatsoever. And that's really the thing that's been hanging over this team this offseason. It's the cloud. Have they done enough to improve it? I don't think we know. They could have gone out there and dominated in the preseason. It doesn't necessarily translate. I feel like they played better, but primarily against backups the last couple of games, And so I'm going on guys like Jeff Loggeman and others who are out there watching these guys throughout the entirety of their training camp practices. And, Logs thinks that the offensive line has done a good job, at the very least holding their own, if not maybe having a little bit of advantage over what we think is going to be a pretty good Jaguars defensive line. So, look, Trevor Lawrence has got weapons. Does he have time, right? If he has time, I think he can be elite. He's got an elite running back. I think he's got an elite tight end. He's got a good enough group of wide receivers here. I think this team can score some points, Gus. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
Nice. That's how I'm feeling too. We'll get to the offensive line a little bit later in the show. But today I wanted to talk to you about that group of receivers that you just mentioned. We're going to go one by one through the starters. We'll get to Brian Thomas later. Obviously, he's been kind of the talk of that room so far in the offseason. But starting out with Christian Kirk, I'm just going to pull up his projections via NFL.com for the 2024 season. They have him as 80 receptions, over 1,000 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns. Mike, just what are your general expectations for Christian Kirk going into this season, or just kind of general thoughts about the player?
I'm not a big stat projector, but those numbers look reasonable to me, right? Like, I feel like if you are breaking Kirk down, he and Evan Ingram are going to be the most frequently targeted guys in this passing game. And I just think that Trevor Lawrence has a really big comfort level with Christian Kirk. And we saw the offense kind of stagnate when, on top of Zay Jones already being out, Christian Kirk missed the last 5 games or so last year after getting hurt in the Cincinnati game. Who knows if he plays that game, the Jags may be the 2-time defending AFC South champions. That's the difference, really, what it comes down to. So I just think that you look back now, Gus, how ridiculous was all the hand-wringing about the contract that Christian Kirk got, right? Like, he blew out the market. Well, now he's just about a little over half of the top of the market right now. He's not Justin Jefferson. He's not that guy, but I think he's a great safety blanket. And if you're going to ask me who's going to have the most receptions among the receivers, I absolutely think Kirk will be the most targeted guy. And this is presuming health for all of them, but that he'll have the most catches of anybody on the team.
I'm with you. Actually, my expectations for him is just to lead the Jaguars in every receiving category by the end of the season, because I think what we saw, especially last year, is that the Jags will spread the ball out in every game, depending on the situation, depending on the opponent. And they really like having kind of like the full depth from top to bottom, just with all their pass catchers, rather than relying on a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase to kind of get the most production. But with that said, while it's going to kind of go back to back through each game and even through each quarter, I think by the end of the season, it's going to be pretty clear who the Jaguars' number one receiver is. And I was going to mention the contract too. I almost feel a little bit bad that that's probably the thing that Kirk is most known for, just nationally. But like, I'm pretty sure he currently ranks 24th in annual contract value at this point. So, like you were saying, it's kind of a steal right now.
Yeah, I mean, he's in a good spot. The Jags didn't overpay. He brought, I thought, even though it wasn't like he came from such an overwhelming winning culture, I think he's a winning player. On the way he goes about a little bit, I don't know if he leads in every category. I think he's the best bet to get the most receptions. I think he's probably about even money, maybe a slight favorite, like 55% to lead in receiving yards this year. But I don't think we can completely rule Brian Thomas out of the mix because he's going to be such a big play guy. I don't think he's going to be, catching 70-plus balls this year. But it's the touchdowns where I'm not sure. I think, Evan Ingram's never been a big touchdown guy, and if we're including him, I think that changes this year. I think they're going to really look to get him the ball in the red zone. But beyond that, we've both seen it out of practice. I mean, they're taking more shots down the seam, and I just hope Trevor has enough time to throw to make those plays possible.
Absolutely. We're not going to get into Ingram on today's show, but absolutely, as we saw in the preseason game against the Falcons, he's definitely going to be utilized in the red zone, almost a la Zach Ertz in Philadelphia, the way that Doug Peterson used to use him. We should see more of that this season. Last thing on Kirk, I just wanted to ask you what you think his biggest strength is. I'll go first. I think part of the reason I'm confident in him leading the Jags in production all across the board is just because he's the first guy that gets targets schemed up for him. Last year, he actually finished 5th in yards per route run against man coverage, behind only Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, DJ Moore, and Nico Collins. I think a large part of that is just that he kind of gets like the slot mismatches against linebackers. He gets slot fades. He's like really the priority chess piece for the Jaguars offense. And so I would say the biggest strength for him is trust, because he has the trust in the coaching staff to get schemed up on those targets. It's not like just anyone can take advantage of those looks. He obviously has a trust from his quarterback. He and Trevor Lawrence have a great relationship, and I'm pretty sure they're like neighbors and golf buddies and all of that. And then from the front office, we talk about the contract. Obviously, there's a lot of trust there. And so what would you say is Christian Kirk's biggest strength heading into the year?
I think it's two things. I think if you're talking about from a pure X's and O's standpoint, it's his route running. He's a very crisp route runner. Sure. And so in a short area, he can get great separation on guys, which goes to your point about trust. It's not just the trust of the coaching staff. I think it's the chemistry / trust, the relationship with Trevor Lawrence and what you're talking about there. And I think it comes from the fact that Kirk is a good player and he's in the right places and he knows what to do. It's not just that, hey, he's my buddy and we're going to go out there and pump 140 targets his way. So I think it's twofold. I think as a player, I don't know if around the league he gets the kind of recognition because, people are like, somebody's got to catch the ball. It's not that easy. So I think he's a really good route runner. But to your point, I do think the chemistry with Trevor Lawrence is pretty high in that list.
Chemistry is almost kind of a buzzword. Just like it's easier for me and you to see on the practice field too, like just the ability that they have to hook up with each other on the field. It's kind of that thing people say where they know what each other is thinking.
It's like our chemistry here.
Absolutely.
I mean, first broadcast together, look at us. We're like old pals.
Absolutely. All right, let's get to the next guy on our list. Gabe Davis is projected by NFL.com to finish 2024 with 57 receptions, 788 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. And so I'll start with the same question. Just what are your expectations for Gabe Davis entering 2024?
First thing is, beyond expectations, is what builds the expectations is putting your eyes on him every single day, right? Like you look at him up in Buffalo, and he always averages, 14.5 to 15.5 yards per catch. And so you think of him as this, like pure speedster, get down the field, but he's like a thick-bodied guy, right? Sure. And I think that projection is low on touchdowns for Gabe Davis. I think that, in terms of the number of receptions, where is he in the pecking order for targets, right? I mean, he's behind Kirk, he's behind Ingram. Any given week, he may be behind Brian Thomas or even Travis Etienne.
Right.
But I do think, from we've both seen it, we saw it in the preseason, it didn't always connect, but they're looking to get him the ball in the red zone. I think he's got a big body. He's built differently than the rest of the wide receivers are, certainly. Now, when you've got Brian Thomas on one side and he's flashing legit 4.3 speed, I think that's where you roll your safety coverage too, especially if he hits a couple of plays early in the year.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can hit him with Gabe Davis, who's been doing that his entire career. Gabe Davis scores like 7 touchdowns in his sleep, like every single year. I just think, and like I get it, he's playing with Josh Allen. It's a new circumstance, but the way that I think they're planning to utilize him in the red zone, I think that touchdown total is a little low for my consideration.
I agree with you, especially what we were saying at the top, where you kind of think of him as like this downfield burner, especially just the way he was utilized in Buffalo. One thing I've been harping on this whole offseason is just that he's going to be used across the middle of the field a lot, and isn't like Brian Thomas is kind of in that burner role for the Jaguars.
Sure.
But I think Gabe Davis is going to be more of like that glue guy who's going to be able to like rack up with his larger body and contested catch ability, be able to run those like backside digs and slants with a lot of traffic coming in on him. I think he's going to be able to gain trust from Trevor pretty quickly.
I think the oversimplification is you're going to see Kirk handle the underneath stuff. Not that he'll never stretch the field, right? And you're going to see Gabe Davis in the intermediate part of the field, and Brian Thomas is your field stretcher. Now, how much you can integrate them into different aspects and don't pigeonhole them into one role is going to make your offense that much more successful. But we've seen that, again, go to practice, go to these preseason games, and we're seeing them trying to hit that 20-yard crosser with Gabe Davis. And he's got the kind of body that can make the reception, take a little bit of punishment if necessary, and, pick up some key first downs. And, yeah, I'm excited to see what he brings. I think, again, the reception total, that's going to land, but I do think he's going to be a big red zone weapon.
For sure. I think, honestly, across the board, I think he might be a little bit more effective and a little bit more productive than people might assume coming off of his role in Buffalo. A lot of people like to think of receiver rooms as like basketball teams where you have different positions being able to fill different roles. And so in Christian Kirk, you have a guy who can win a one-on-one isolation and get a bucket for you, almost like a Kyrie Irving. And then in Brian Thomas, you've got someone who can spread the field or spread the floor with their deep play ability, make maybe like a three-point shooter like JJ Redick.
So Gabe Davis is our mid-range shooter then?
I was going to say he's like the forward that every NBA team wants, like a PJ Tucker or like an Aaron Gordon or a Jeremiah Grant, where he kind of is able to fill a few different roles depending on what the team needs from him in a specific game or series matchup or whatever. And so for me, I think Gabe Davis's biggest strength entering the season is his versatility, because he still can win on those deep routes. And then we've seen him win plenty of times across the middle and in the red zone this offseason so far. But then the Jaguars can also ask him to line up as an inline blocker and contribute on run plays. And so I think even if he's not going to be the most productive player on the team, I think he's maybe the most versatile pass catcher. But what would you say is his biggest strength entering the season?
I think that's a good one. Versatility is a good one. He comes from a winning atmosphere is another one. He's used to playing deep into the season, you know, and in big, meaningful games. And that's not just Gabe Davis. That was seemingly a focal point of the Jaguars' free agent pursuit this year, to get guys like that. So, not to steal what you just said, but he can do those things, right? He can go over the middle. He can be that short area, big-bodied, red zone, post-up guy. He can also stretch the field. So let's hope he brings all those talents to the table, particularly this week against Miami.
For sure. All right, last guy we're going to hit on is the rookie, Brian Thomas Jr. He's projected for 61 receptions, 784 yards, and 5 touchdowns. I've got a stat here for him. There's only been 16 wide receivers in the past 5 years to reach 750 yards and 5 touchdowns. I'll run through them super quick. Puka Nacua, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, Jalen Waddle, Rashee Rice, CeeDee Lamb, Terry McLaurin, Devontae Smith, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jordan Addison, T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, Chase Claypool, Zay Flowers, Jaden Reed. So those are all borderline household names, at least, right?
And you're talking about guys who did it as rookies.
As a rookie in their first year, in the last 5 years. And so that's basically about 3 per season, but what are your expectations for Brian Thomas?
I think, we're going to see a lot of splash plays from him, but we're also probably going to see some games where he has 2 catches for 25 yards. He's a rookie, but man, I tell you, if we didn't have this year's rookie trio at the top, all going in the top 10, I think you might look at Brian Thomas and go, wow, this guy played at LSU. Has anybody come out of LSU who's any good catching the football? Oh, I don't know. Yes, all of these guys you just named. I mean, Chase, Jefferson, OBJ, they've been a factory of guys. Malik Neighbors is drawing rave reviews, but let's not forget that Brian Thomas led the country in touchdowns. So, and I know you know that. With 17 last, that diverse in college, but that doesn't mean he's not capable. Intrigued by watching him in the preseason, a lot of hype around a guy who's caught 3 balls in the preseason, but he does. I think that probably my favorite thing about him since he was drafted was after the first joint practice with the Bucs. Apparently, a lot of the defensive players were just kind of shaking their head like, damn.
Mm-hmm.
You don't realize how fast that guy is until you see four, three, whatever it is, in action at 6.
It looks like we're still live, so sorry.
All right.
I thought we were going to have to start a new stream. All right, sorry about the technical difficulties, but we should be good to go. We were talking about Brian Thomas, just agreeing that we expect him to be effective in year 1, but maybe not necessarily productive. Mike was saying that there's going to be a few games where he might just have 2 catches for 25 yards, but
that's probably the case, by the way, for all of them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you've got so many weapons, not to cut you off there, that they're all going to have to take a back seat at some point or another. Do you agree? Brian Thomas's greatest impact in many ways might be his impact on Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram and Gabe Davis, right? Because if he really does, if you hit a couple of big plays early in the season, word gets out, hey, man, you got to put a safety over the top on this guy every time. And then all of a sudden, that one thing opens up a little bit for everybody else.
Yeah, it almost seems like a cliche. Like people will just say, oh, add a Deshaun Jackson type to the offense, spread everything out, and everything will be easier. But it's one of those things that's honestly as easy as it sounds, kind of, as long as you can find a guy that has like the devastating speed of someone like Deshaun Jackson. And then you mentioned earlier that it's not only the 4.3 speed for Brian Thomas, but also the size that he does it at. There's not a lot of guys in the league that have that combination of speed and size. And so I think it's going to be a week-to-week thing. We've already seen him take a lot of steps throughout the offseason so far, and especially in recent weeks. But I think he's going to be continuing to grow. And so personally, this is one where we both liked the projections from NFL.com for Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk. And if anything, thought they might be a little bit low. But for Brian Thomas, I think something closer to 500 or 600 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns might be the right way to just expect his production as
for expectations. But would I be shocked if he scores 8?
No.
You know what? He's got that ability. It's just how quickly. And today, it used to be, and wide receivers would break out in year 3 or 4. Go look at Reggie Wayne's early career stat lines from like his first 3 or 4 seasons. They're not Hall of Fame numbers, right? And he's a Hall of Famer because he came on at that point. But now college passing games are getting these guys ready earlier than ever to step in and contribute. Even if you can't run the full route tree, every single one out there, they're going to find ways to put Brian Thomas in positions where he can help this team win.
Absolutely. And I mean, even though I said earlier, Christian Kirk is kind of the guy that gets schemed up more than anyone else, they're definitely going to do a good job. We have already seen a little bit just in the offseason, like in Bucs practices. He ran a slow-go, a slant and go from the slot, and that was kind of like the big play on either Wednesday or Thursday. But he will definitely get his opportunities in this offense. And so for the last question, just what do you think? And speed is definitely an acceptable answer. What would you say is his biggest strength entering the year?
Talking about Thomas?
Yes.
Yeah, it's got to be the speed, right? The speed that puts defensive coordinators on notice. He's like, all right, we got to understand where 7's going to be out there, and just that impact. I think. I mean, it's like, look at when you're the Jags this week preparing for the Miami Dolphins. There's speed everywhere around the field, and that's so dangerous. And Jags have needed more of that. So I'm going to go with the field stretching ability until proven otherwise, until I see him, become more of an across the middle receiver and have more of a complete game. And by the way, those 3 guys at the top, like him a bunch. Devin Duvernay, unlike Jamal Agnew, came up as a wide receiver, right?
Yeah.
So maybe a little bit more accomplished in that area if called upon. And Parker Washington, as we know, phenomenal. During the offseason. Had one of the best off seasons of any Jags. So you got a little bit of depth if things go awry.
Totally. Just to have a different strength from you, I would say what you were referencing earlier, actually, just the way he glides, Thomas Jr.'s smoothness. And so that gives me confidence that he will be able to kind of grow a further route tree and be able to do different things other than just go routes and hitch routes like he was asked at LSU. And so obviously you see in the acceleration and the speed how smooth he is, but then also just contested catch ability, separating from receivers. Like everything he does, as long as he has the confidence to go with it, is extraordinarily smooth. And so I feel like DK Metcalf is probably the most fair comparison for him, especially in terms of that height and speed combination. But I understand when people say they see a little bit of Brandon Ayuk in his game just because he's such a smooth operator.
Yeah, Ayuk's such a good route runner. DK, it's just hard to get away from that physique. There's really no one quite like him, but I understand what you're saying. 6'3" and can run by anybody.
For sure. All right, Mike, before we get you out of here, just since you are a fantasy football guy, I know that a lot of fantasy drafts have already wrapped up, but just who's your favorite Jaguars pick this year? Who are you above expectations?
Probably my favorite pick is Evan Ingram. He's not going to go the highest out of any Jaguar. Travis Etienne's going like late second round of the 12-team league, unless you're in one of the Jaguars Today leagues, and he's going in the late first round. Okay, but we understand that you pay the local tax on those guys. But Ingram, I could see, he's not going to catch 114 balls unless something goes drastically wrong with the wide receiver core. But I could see him being an 85, 90 catch guy here. And if the touchdowns come up, I feel like, there's like the elite tier where you've got Kelsey and you've got Mark Andrews and maybe Laporta after last year. But I don't think there's any reason why Evan Ingram can't be in that next group of 3 or 4 tight ends. And, if I draft him at my tight end position, I feel I'm good. Don't need to worry about it. Move on. I mean, I think you're getting great values again outside of Jacksonville on Brian Thomas, Gabe Davis, Trevor Lawrence going as quarterback 16
for sure.
But I think the best value of all of them is Ingram.
Yeah, I don't disagree. He's also said multiple times this offseason without problems how he wants to be utilized downfield more often. Because last year, especially with all the injuries to the receiver room, he was kind of used in like a short average depth of target role, just really being a security blanket. Right away, especially when Trevor didn't have a lot of time to throw. But I think this year, in addition to the red zone usage that you've mentioned, we'll be able to see a little bit more of the seam balls, a little bit more contested catches utilized down the sideline. And so I'm excited for that as well.
I'm all for it, man. You know what? If they all can run go routes successfully, let's do that all season, right?
Absolutely.
But, Evan's got a new lease on life coming to Jacksonville, man. And, we were talking about it today on Jaguars Today. He had a deserved reputation for having the dropsies when he was in New York, and he came here and his first guy out of practice every single day. He's really worked on his craft a lot, and he's a great fit in this locker room, great fit here in Duval. So I think we've got another big season coming.
All right, Mike, anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
I don't know, man. Jaguars today, 10 to noon. Here with Gus on the Duval Rundown from time to time when I'm lucky enough to get invited back. And I think you're going to do a terrific job with this as you do on all your podcasting work out there. So nothing in particular, just keep locking it in from 10 to noon and know we're excited about the Jags opening up as you are.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Mike. Thought it was a great first guest and definitely looking forward to having you back.
Yeah, I blame me for the technical glitch, people. Think about it. The camera's focusing on this face for too long. It needs to cool down a little bit. Gus, kill it for the rest of the show. We'll all be watching.
All right, thank you. Next up, we're going to have top quotes. Let me try to see if I can figure out all of these technical difficulties, but
I got a top quote for you. There you go.
All right, here we go. So we're going to start out with Shad Khan on this season's expectations. This video is via Jaguars YouTube in the latest episode of The Hunt. Let me get that video pulled up really quickly.
All right, guys, let's get started here. We've got our owner here, Mr. Shad Khan, and of course Tony's here. So, Mr. Khan, you've got the podium.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Doug. So, it's my privilege here to welcome all of you to the training camp for the Jaguars, our 30th year. About a month ago, we celebrated the city's partnership with the Jaguars and the approval of funding for the new Stadium of the Future. So I met with the reporters, and the discussion obviously quickly turned to football, and I was quoted, "For us, winning now is the expectation." So really, I've been looking forward to tonight to set the record straight. I was not misquoted, and let me just repeat, winning now is the expectation. Make no mistake, this is the best team assembled by the Jacksonville Jaguars ever. Best players, best coaches, but most importantly, let's prove it by winning now.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. And he's right. He's right. The opportunity's right in front of us. It's about winning. You know, we're in this business to win and to win now. So, and that's our goal each and every day as we strive. Does it mean we're going to be perfect? No. It's not going to be perfect, but we're going to strive for greatness.
All right. Now we've got Doug Peterson talking yesterday in a Zoom presser. Let's see if I can get this pulled up. I apologize for how not sexy this looks, but it is the first show, and so it's going to be a little bit of a work in progress. But here was Doug Peterson's response to what Shad said via Jaguars YouTube. Bear with me for about 2 more seconds.
Sure. How have you sort of seen the team maybe embody that statement?
Yeah, I think I think he's right on. I think that that is our expectation. It's always our expectation, and each year you put together and you assemble the best team, the best set of coaches, and you got to put in the time. You got to work hard, and that's he sees what we've done the last 2 years. And the successes that we've had, but he also knows, and we know that we're better than the way we finished last year. And I think that's something that he alluded to, but he's right. That's the expectation, and we're all held to that.
Well, I don't really have much to add to that, but I just thought it was interesting and worth adding. This one is definitely worth adding. Doug Peterson was asked at the same presser who will be calling offensive plays in 2024 between him and offensive coordinator Press Taylor.
Favorite question, I suppose, or your favorite question. Press going to be the full-time play caller in 2024. Have you made up your mind on that?
I still haven't made my mind up yet.
Okay. Okay. So you anticipate by Wednesday possibly having an answer for us?
Maybe.
Possibly.
Yeah, maybe.
Um,
You may never know.
Can
So
you?
you can just stop with the question right now. You'll never know.
Okay.
Well, I know that Doug was smiling in that, but he obviously does not love the questions about who's going to be calling plays. And as he said, he might not ever tell us. And so he clearly wants it to be as non-story as possible. But if the Jaguars' offensive struggles relatively continue into the season, especially in short yardage situations and in the red zone, which is where they've especially struggled to convert, there's going to be a lot of noise about who really is calling offensive plays in Jacksonville, especially after it was such a big talking point in Philadelphia for both Doug Peterson and Press Taylor. Let's get to a few more quotes. This comes from an ESPN article by Mike Duraco. Can Jaguars' Josh Hines-Allen build a legacy in Jacksonville? I was working really hard. I was waking up really early, Hines-Allen remembered, and I'm looking up there and I'm seeing Tony Baselli and I'm seeing all these guys. I'm like, I'm going to put my name up there. So what Josh was referencing was the pride of the Jaguars that's in Everbank Stadium. And this was just a really good piece by Mike going over how important legacy is to Josh, especially after he changed his name. So would recommend checking out the full article, but I liked that quote from it. Another article worth checking out is 5 bold Jaguars predictions for the 2024 season via John Shipley of Jaguars on SI. In one point in the article, John went over 4 different players he thought could make the Pro Bowl this year. He said, one of the most dynamic running backs in the AFC, even a marginally more efficient running game, would make Travis Etienne one of the league's most productive running backs by a good amount. I just want to bring this quote up because I agree with it. And I think Travis Etienne is a guy almost similar to how Mike and I were talking about Christian Kirk earlier, where a lot of people might remember him most for the big contract that he signed. A lot of people might remember Travis Etienne most for just being a first-round running back selected in the NFL draft, which in this age of analytics is not always a great idea, but I can tell you absolutely that Travis Etienne, the player, is worth it. And there's a fantasy writer called Mario Puig who I read one time said Travis Etienne is inevitable as a runner. And that really stuck out to me because, again, I agree. I think Travis is almost a little bit underrated at this point. But if he's able to benefit from Brian Thomas opening up the field and the addition of Mitch Morse, hopefully the offensive line will improve. I think Etienne can be in for a Pro Bowl season. Trevor Sikkema of PFF also had some predictions in an article titled Bold Predictions for all 32 NFL teams in 2024. Sikkema projected Lawrence to go over 4,500 passing yards this season. He has yet to pass for 4,000 yards in his career, I believe. But Sikkema wrote, Lawrence has thrown just over 4,500 passing yards in each of the past 2 seasons. Well, I just had to read the quote. Never mind. In each of his first 3 years in the NFL, his yards per attempt have gone up. His 2024 is now poised to be his most prolific passing season yet. Last year on passes of 20 or more yards, the Jaguars ranked 8th in total attempts, 8th in completion percentage, 5th in total yards, and 1st in big-time throws. Throwing deep is what they wanted to do, and now they have Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis to launch it to. Again, I agree with Sikkema's take. I also wanted to point out that I think the over for yards is a better bet for any gambling degenerates out there, as opposed to the over for passing yards for Trevor Lawrence. I'm not sure exactly what the lines are set at. Obviously, it depends on the sports book that you're looking at. But because the Jaguars are health abiding so good, kind of between the 20s at just picking up first downs and moving the chains, I think Trevor's yardage is definitely going to be impressive this year. And then the touchdowns is really just going to improve to how efficient they can be in the red zone going forward. Jeff Howell of The Athletic recently wrote in an athletic piece that was titled, Every NFL's team's biggest concern as 2024 begins. He wrote, Coach Doug Peterson knows it's important to do a better job of protecting quarterback Trevor Lawrence, so you can't rule out the offensive line. I'm also not sure if they've got enough reserve pass rushers, but I think new defensive coordinator Ryan Nielsen's aggressive nature will stir up added pressure. So I'll maintain my greatest concern is the early stretch against the Dolphins, Browns, Bills, and Texans, with all but the Cleveland game on the road. If the Jaguars show up as a team that limped down the stretch in 2023, they'll be 0-4. but I think the Jaguars will turn it back around and contend for a playoff spot. I was expecting offensive line to be the biggest concern that Hal listed, but I just thought it was worth bringing up his point that the Jaguars do have a tough schedule. Obviously, week 1 against the Finns is going to be a tough test, with it being Ryan Nielsen's first game as defensive coordinator, and then Miami coach Mike McDaniel is just known as being an offensive genius and someone that comes up with new ideas a lot in the offseason, just kind of unleashes them in the first couple of games. And so, again, it'll be a tough test right away and in the first month for the Jaguars this season. The last thing we got is not as much of a quote, but John Osher, senior writer for Jaguars.com, posted, reposted, I guess, because the Jaguars announced their team captains for the 2024 season. It'll be quarterback Trevor Lawrence, tight end Evan Engram, defensive end Josh Hines-Allen, linebacker Foye Oluokun, punter Logan Cook, and Peterson will also be rotating a 6th captain in each week in addition to the 5 permanent captains. And so, if I'm remembering correctly, I think this is Engram's first time as a captain, at least in Jacksonville, but each of the other 4 guys have been named captain for at least one season in Jacksonville. That's all we got for the quote section. And now it's time for chat therapy. And so this is basically just the point where I open up to the audience and just kind of have a conversation with you guys if you want. So I've got some comments here that I can pull up. Let's see what we got. Did this guy, the Jaguars, start 0-4? No, he was just saying if they are the team from last year, then they could start at 0-4. But considering how injured the Jaguars were last year, I think that that's not going to happen, especially because I like the Jaguars' offense, the Jaguars' chances against the Browns in week 2. Deshaun Watson is obviously doesn't inspire a lot of confidence as a person, but as a player as well. Like, he's really been going through it with his shoulder. It seems like he doesn't have nearly as much zip on the ball as he used to. Browns offense is also going to be transitioning from kind of like a power, multiple tight end set scheme to more of a spread out offense under new offense coordinator Ken Dorsey, who came over from the Bills last year. He was kind of like the scapegoat of that offense. And so I'm excited to see what Dorsey kind of schemes up for the offense, because I think he's a good play caller. I also am generally a fan of Kevin Stefanski, but I think just because it's a new system and there's so many questions around Deshaun Watson, and then the Browns defense is amazing, but just analytics will tell you they're probably going to regress a little bit from last year, especially considering how many poor quarterbacks they faced. I do like the Jaguars' chances, especially in their home opener this year. So appreciate this comment from Travis, my guy. Great show. We understand technology is fun. I was afraid I was going to have to start a new stream, but at least this one kind of continued. And so hopefully you guys were able to stay around. Glad I could be here for episode 1. Thank you, Duval TV, Jaguars Madden Gaming on YouTube. My guy Jifu turning in from Korea. Thank you to Jifu. That's big time. Always love international guests. So I kind of got into this just industry, I guess, because I wanted to interact with Jaguars, or just Jaguars fans, but I mostly thought of it as Jacksonville people. But it's been really cool to see just international people get excited about the team. I had someone reach out recently from Canada who was just asking for tailgating tips. So I directed them to Old City Brigade, but always cool seeing kind of a small market team have fans all over the world. Let's see if we got anything else in the comments that's worth pulling up. BTJ Go Zoom. Agreed, Jamal. Agreed. Filtered mics. Yeah, I was thinking I might record separately going forward, because we actually don't have a microphone right here in front of us. And so going to be working on the audio and really just the whole show. So appreciate everyone's patience as we just make this a work in progress. Duval Dive said, BTJ is the best thing imaginable for Christian Kirk and Evan Engram. All it will take is 1 to 2 big plays in the first 4 games to open things up for those two. Mike was saying that too, where especially if Brian gets a couple big plays at the beginning of the season, and I agree with both of y'all, where I think it's going to be something that the Jaguars coaching staff focuses on, is even if I was saying earlier that Christian Kirk gets the majority of kind of like schemed up looks, I think they're really going to make sure Brian is schemed up in the first couple of weeks, partly to just continue building up his confidence as he is a year one rookie and still just 21 years old. And he's gotten like good reviews from Trevor Lawrence and the coaching staff about picking up the offense, but you can only continue to get better. And so similar to how we saw in the Chiefs preseason game where Brian got a huge catch and then it just completely changed his confidence in his performance throughout the rest of the offseason, I think the Jaguars will be looking for something like that in the regular season as well. But also just to make sure that defensive coordinators really like see tape of this guy winning in an NFL game will be important. And that once they see it on film, then they're going to be saying, okay, we need to really pay attention to this guy. But until Brian Thomas makes a couple plays, and they're not going to be as worried about it. And so, again, Duval Dive, love y'all's work. I agree with you and Dempsey that look out, even if Brian Thomas isn't like a rookie of the year type player to start out, I think he's going to have his share of splash plays to open the season. UCF Jaguar, big YouTube guy. Appreciate you tuning in. BTJ will have more receiving yards in 2024 than Calvin Ridley in 2023. Now, people who followed my work know that I'm a bit of Calvin Ridley guy. I think I mostly just got fired up last offseason seeing him practice because John Shipley will agree with me, my guy, that was the most impressive Jaguar at practices last year. I think John actually got a quote from a Jaguars player who said, just hands down, this is one of the most impressive players I've seen in practice ever. And so maybe we got a little bit too wrapped up with that, especially considering that Calvin Ridley was coming back from almost 2 years out of the league. But I'm still of the belief that Calvin Ridley is a very good football player and that the Jaguars didn't necessarily use him as well as they could have last year. But he did finish last season with over 1,000 yards receiving, 1,000 yards and 16 to be exact. So if Brian has more receiving yards than Calvin Ridley did last year, I'll be pretty surprised, but I respect the take, UCF Jaguar. Floyd Brooks agrees. Bold take, 1,000 in the first year. Great minds. Let's see what we got in the comments section. See, Floyd, BTJ for Offensive Rookie of the Year. As impressed as I've been by Brian Thomas, I do not think he is a good bet for Offensive Rookie of the Year. I think, obviously, there's going to be a lot of hype around Caleb Williams, and I think as long as he stays healthy, it's really his award to win. We've seen a lot of times in the past that if a quarterback has a solid season as a rookie, he's going to win. Like last year, I mean, C.J. Stroud obviously deserved to win, but Puka Nacua also set multiple receiving records for a rookie tight end in his first year, and he didn't even sniff Offensive Rookie of the Year. So I would expect it to go to Caleb, and even if Caleb doesn't get it, like Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a target hog from day one in an ascending Cardinals team. Excuse me. And so I have high hopes for Brian in year one, but as I was telling Mike, I think he's going to be more effective than he's productive. So I'm personally not going to be betting on him to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. Duval Dive said someone drafted BTJ in the second round of a sleeper draft. That's crazy. That's crazy. Isn't Gus part of I'm not a part of that media group, but I appreciate you thinking that I am, because I meant to say this earlier, but the Jaguars' production team is outstanding. I assume that everyone that's watching this show has already seen every episode of The Hunt, but if you have not, I would absolutely recommend going back to tune in. Really everything the Jaguars put on their YouTube is pretty great, but especially their production of The Hunt, which is kind of their off-season, behind-the-scenes YouTube series. And so, again, recommend that for sure. Floyd, very active in the comments. Love you, Floyd. Let Shad cook. Donald Johnson says, I have her ceiling at 11.6 and floor 9.7. What's your prediction? That's interesting, Donald, because it's not a very big difference between ceiling and floor there. I think floor is probably, even though they finished, 9-8 each of the past 2 years, and it's felt like very two different seasons. I think probably 8 and 9 is our floor, because we've seen that even if a bunch of injuries happen, including to the franchise quarterback, that they're able to kind of like scrape their way through. At least they're able to beat a horrible team like the Carolina Panthers late in the year. So I think 6 or 7 wins, or 7, 8, 7, we'll call it 7 wins is probably the floor. And then, not that I expect them to reach a ceiling, but I think the ceiling is a 13-win season where Trevor has made, I don't think he's necessarily going to win MVP, but I think he could receive MVP votes just because I've been kind of a Trevor apologist since he was drafted. And I think he's just that dude. And so if Trevor takes a step that I'm expecting him to, and Brian and Thomas and Gabe Davis are able to kind of like fit into their roles in the offense as well as I'm expecting to, really, we would just need the red zone and short yardage situations to get cleaned up a bit. And then I think the offense and the defense can both be good enough any given week to finish with a top 1 or 2 seed in the AFC. But I think 10-7 is, or 10-6, whatever it is probably my general prediction. Browns just got Jamar Chase. That can't be true. I'm just gonna have to move on from that. I don't know what that means. Duval dive. Good question. What's your main concern from Miami? The run game for this Jacks front or the receivers for the secondary? I think the run game is definitely a good thing to bring up because Mike McDaniel is actually kind of known as being the run planning guru in San Francisco. And then since he's been in Miami, he's just been great as a passing game and running game coach. But that running game is certainly very explosive and very dangerous. But I'm a little bit less scared of that aspect of the Miami's offense just because I think that the Jaguars defense is better than the Miami offense in terms of front seven versus offensive line. I think the front seven is one of the strengths of the Jaguars defense, especially right out of the gate, like when Ryan Nielsen is maybe doing a little bit of adjusting. And then the Miami offensive line is both kind of lacking talent and a little bit injured. And that's probably like the biggest question mark for the Dolphins. And so I think it's worth bringing up Miami's run game, but I'm certainly more concerned about Miami's receivers, even though Odell Beckham, Jalen Waddle, and Tyreek Hill have missed time recently with various injuries. I'm assuming that at least Tyreek and Jalen will be ready for week 1, and it's going to be a really big test to contain those two. I mean, Tyreek was on pace to break 2,000 yards receiving, which has rarely been done in the season. Maybe only it's been rarely done for a receiver to break 2,000 receiving yards, and he was on pace and before he suffered a late season injury. And then Jalen Waddle was crazy productive as a number 2. Usually when you have kind of like a number 1 target hog guy, even if you have a great number 2 receiver, you don't see him be super productive. But Jalen Waddle had a super high target share as well next to Tyreek Hill. And so for those guys, kind of the name of the game is speed kills. And so like the way that Miami's offense is able to be so devastating is that a lot of passing concepts that would take most teams to run in like 5-step drops, or the quarterback takes 5 steps to drop back in the pocket and then throws a timing concept. Because Jalen and Tyreek are so fast, Tua Tagovailoa is able to just do 3-step dropbacks and rifle the ball out, again, just because of the speed of his receivers. And so that makes everything quicker for the passing game, and thus it makes the offensive line, at least in pass protection, a little bit less of a concern for Miami. And so for the Jaguars defense, obviously it'll be interesting to see how they do lined up in press coverage against those receivers. Brandon Staley, even though he had not a great time as the Los Angeles Chargers head coach, he did have a brilliant scheme or game plan. I think it was 2 seasons ago now, but maybe it was last season against the Dolphins offense. And he basically pressed the receivers to hell, which screwed up all the timing concepts for Miami's offense. And so Tua was like having to hold on to the ball for a little bit longer, and then that messed up all the timing, and then Tua would get flustered. And even though he's got some wheels, he's not really exactly a playmaker outside of the pocket. And so I think that's going to be the key for the Jaguars defense is pressing the receivers. As Ryan Nielsen likes to say, nothing cheap and nothing deep. They're going to be pressing, so there's not going to be a lot of like free access. There's not going to be a lot of quick screens that they can just get chunk yards. But then there's definitely going to be a lot of 2 high safety coverage from the Jaguars with both Antonio Johnson and Andre Cisco playing back deep, playing shell coverage to make sure that nothing gets by them. And so for me, as important as Tyson Campbell and Ronald Darby's jobs are to press those receivers at the line of scrimmage, I think it's going to be even more vital for Johnson and Cisco and for the safeties in the back end to really just not let anything behind them. Luffy says, we should beat the Dolphins. I don't disagree. I think Ryan Nielsen is going to come out with a bang, but like it sounds a little silly when I say Mike McDaniel just cooks up amazing things in the offseason and unleashes them in week 1, but it's a true story. Let's see if we got anything else. Talking about Ridley, let's hope he doesn't have the drops like Ridley. Fair point. Ridley definitely had some brutal drops last year, especially because they were in like bad situations. Like the majority of them were just straight up in the end zone. So it was drop touchdowns. And so, yeah, I think Brian Thomas will probably have some growing pains, drops included. So I also hope that he doesn't have end zone drops, but I would try to, again, he's not going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year, in my opinion. So try to taper expectations a little bit. Practice All-American. You are right, Duval. He was fun to watch in practice. Those were good times. I suggest going forward to have shows where you can have a Discord where fans can give their opinions on topics discussed in a show. Donna, do you mean a Discord where people talk live, kind of like we're doing right now, or a Discord? I guess you mean kind of in general, but I'll look into that. I think a Discord could be cool. I appreciate that suggestion. Suggestions are very much welcome, especially since this is very much in the process. Are you guys planning on having guests on this show in the future? Young PL1 asks again. Yes, Mike was the first guest. It's going to be me every week. I'm the host. But on Thursdays, we're going to have Mia O'Brien on the show every single week. On Tuesdays, it's going to be kind of a rotating guest of different 1010XL hosts like Mike. I forget who we have scheduled next week, but like Tony Smith is going to be on. Coach Campo is going to be on, which I'm really excited about. He's the former head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and he appears on a couple of different shows for 1010XL. We're going to have Hacker on. We're probably going to have Denmark and Marsh on. They've got kind of a similar version of this show, but for the Gators. And so I'd recommend going to Gators 1010XL to check that out. But to answer your question, yes, I will be having guests on the show, including for the live post-game shows for every episode. Well, that looks like all the comments we've got. Like I said, this is very much a work in progress. Suggestions are appreciated. Yeah, I guess we'll end it there. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you on Thursday at noon. Like I said, I'll be joined by Mia O'Brien, possibly right here. Maybe I'll record from home to make the technical difficulties go away and make the audio a little better. But yeah, we need more Meathead. He'll be on. I can promise you that. I'm not sure when, but I will get Tom McManus on the show. And so until next time, thank you guys very much for tuning in. Go Jags.